Hi there, my name is Jack Wallen and I'm here with another Linux 101. Now this time I'm going to talk about Ubuntu, but I'm going to talk about it in ways that you may never have heard of it referred. I can't get out of this sentence. I need a period or an exclamation point. I don't know. Let's just end it right now. Okay, look. Two things happened recently that I want to talk about by way of Ubuntu. And one of them is just kind of sort of factual, not sort of, is factual. And the other one is a kind of a, not a how-to, but a tip on those of you who are using Ubuntu with NVIDIA. Okay, part the first. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I don't remember when, I wrote a piece for ZDNet about DistroWatch. Now, if you've never heard of DistroWatch, it is a website dedicated to keeping track of Linux distributions. And if you can imagine, just about, if not every distribution on the planet has a page on DistroWatch. And it is a great resource for you to find a new distribution or find out if your distribution of choice has been updated, blah, blah, blah. There's even a really cool feature at the top left corner where you can hit the random button and it will send you to a random Linux distribution page. I use that quite a bit to discover distributions I'd never heard of, which is a rare occasion unless it's a really niche or new distribution. So here's the thing about DistroWatch, and this is what I wrote about. And it might surprise you. You may know about this, but who knows? So a lot of people, especially writers who cover Linux, point to DistroWatch for certain facts. Now, if you go to distrowatch.com, I think it's com. Might be org, but I think it's com. On the right-hand side, you'll see a listing of what is the top Linux distributions. And here is the disconnect. As I said, every Linux distribution has an individual page on DistroWatch. Now, you could very easily construe that list of top Linux distributions as these are the top Linux distributions according to usage across the globe. But that's not what that is for. What that little sidebar is for is to indicate how popular a certain distribution's DistroWatch page is. So if you look at the page, you might see Linux Mint at the top, or you might see MX Linux at the top, or Zorin OS at the top, or Fedora at the top, or Ubuntu, it doesn't matter. That is not an indicator as to what distribution is the most widely used around the planet. It is not an indicator of which Linux distribution is the most popular. It is just a gauge on how many clicks each individual Linux distribution page has on DistroWatch. I can understand the confusion. And one thing I should point out is I have nothing to do with DistroWatch. I don't do the site. I don't work on the site. I don't write for the site. I don't. But I've used it for a very, very long time. And early on in my career as a tech writer covering open source and Linux, I used to assume that that side panel did indicate which distribution was the most popular. And I would reference it in articles. I don't do that anymore because it is not an indicator of the most popular distributions around the world. So you might see whatever distribution is at the top and you might assume that, oh my gosh, that's the most popular distribution in use. I should try that. No. That is, again, just the amount of hits that distribution's page has on DistroWatch. I think it's per week, maybe per day. I don't know. So when you look at that sidebar, you will probably often see Ubuntu in the top 10, but not always near the top. And sometimes it might drop out of the top 10. And you might think, wow, what happened to Ubuntu? I thought it was the most widely used distribution around the world. Well, here's the problem with that. And I've said this for a very long time, since it became in vogue to track market share, which I hate that term, to invoke market share when referencing an operating system. Let me set the stage for you, okay? So even you in the back of the room, you go to ubuntu.com and you click on the downloads and you go to desktop and you download the desktop ISO. So according to Ubuntu, that's one download from you. So you burn that ISO to a USB drive, or you import it into for a virtual machine. And then you take that USB drive and you install it on a computer. Well, according to Ubuntu, you've still installed it on one computer. But then you take that USB drive and you start installing it on all sorts of computers, all over the place. Friends, family, business, everywhere. You could essentially install Ubuntu on thousands of PCs and laptops. But according to Ubuntu, that's still just one download. And yes, I know that there are online resources that track browsers, browser agents, and distribution and operating systems when you go to a page. Not every page does that. And not every Linux computer, not every computer around the world actually accesses the internet. You might have 10 computers on your home LAN. And of those 10 computers, maybe 2 access the internet. They go beyond your LAN. And the other 8 might be reserved for your LAN. They might be Samba shares and NFC shares and all whatever you have, whatever you need, you have for that machine. You might have a server set up for a Nextcloud instance on your LAN. You could have a streaming server set up. The limitations are the limits are boundless. The sky's the limit, as it were. So there's just it's what we're trying to do is we're trying to quantify something that's not easily quantifiable. And I mean, just if you look at my home network, I don't even know how many Linux PCs I have on them, but maybe 1 or 2 access the internet. So as far as the outside world is concerned, it's only aware of 2 computers running Linux on my network. So as you can see, I don't trust the numbers. I don't trust the market share numbers. I think that Linux, because right now Linux is still in the single digits, under 5%. I don't believe that. I believe it's far higher than that, especially when you take into consideration servers, because there are so many servers out there running Linux. I would venture to say the vast majority of servers around the world are running Linux. And a lot of them are running Ubuntu server, especially when you start looking at cloud and containers, things like that. So as far as Ubuntu is concerned, I still believe, firmly believe this, that it is the most widely used distribution on the planet. And I know that's kind of a bold statement, and I know that there are going to be a lot of people that are going to say, well, what about? We don't really know. We don't. And I don't think we will ever know the exact percentage breakdown of Linux distributions in use. I just don't think we're ever going to know it. But I do firmly believe that Ubuntu is the most, or one of the most widely used Linux distributions around the world. Why is that? Well, I have a theory about that. And I think that theory kind of boils down to two things. The first is name recognition. Because the media, and by media I mean mostly tech writers and journalists, things like that, and users for the longest time, for decades, were all unanimous that Ubuntu was the most user-friendly distribution available. I can't tell you how many times I've written those articles in the past to say, yes, Ubuntu is. And if you do a search for most user-friendly Linux distributions, I guarantee you that 95 to 98% of those articles will include Ubuntu. Now, that's saying something. And because so many, let's say you're new to Linux, you're just curious and you're not sure what you want to use. So you start researching, what is the most user-friendly Linux distribution I can use? And you see an article, and that article has 5 Linux distributions. Ubuntu is one of them. So you go, okay, let me try another one. So you do another search, find another article. Ubuntu, once again, is listed there. And you keep doing that, and you keep doing that. And the one common denominator in there is Ubuntu. And then you look at, you start digging a little deeper, and you discover that most of the Linux distributions on those user-friendly lists are Ubuntu or based on Ubuntu. So you see where I'm going with that. That breeds familiarity. So over time, everybody just keeps perpetuating the idea that Ubuntu is the most user-friendly distribution. And yes, there are arguments against that. Some arguments would say, well, the UI, the desktop environment for Ubuntu isn't familiar to most users, because most users have a bottom panel and Ubuntu has a side panel. And honestly, that's what it comes down to. Because anyone can log on to an Ubuntu desktop and go, okay, well, there's a side row of icons. There's a Firefox icon. I know Firefox. I'll click that. Oh, look, Firefox opens. If I click all those other icons, those applications open. But what's this other little icon, the square of dots? Click that. Oh, that's all the applications installed on the computer. That's the challenge of using Ubuntu. That's it. I understand the concept that, oh, no, all people who are new to Linux need a desktop that is exactly like Windows. But they don't. The thing is, people are much more adaptable than that. For decades, people were used to Windows 95, 98, XP, 7, 10, 8, ME, blah, 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 blah. And yet, they all bought mobile phones. They all bought smartphones that did not have a panel and a start button or a system tray. And guess what? They all got used to it pretty darn fast. And I believe that people are not nearly as afraid of change as the media would portray them. I believe that I could sit anyone down at a desk and say, log into this computer. Okay, now, what do you think is the first step? What do you need to do? And without telling them much of anything, they'll figure it out. So let's just strike that different panel arrangement in Ubuntu and forget that it's a roadblock for new users, okay? Here's the other thing about Ubuntu. And I know that there will be people that'll argue this, but that's the thing. And I knew the second I started this Linux channel, this Linux 101 series, that I would be bombarded with people saying, "Oh no, 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 no." I understand that, and I appreciate that. And if I do make a mistake, you call me out on it, and I'll be like, "You're right. I made a mistake. I am not above that. I have written many a mea culpa." Okay, so the other thing about Ubuntu is hardware recognition. It is a rare occasion that I install Ubuntu on a desktop or a laptop and it doesn't recognize the hardware. It's really good at it. In fact, I would say that Ubuntu is better than Windows at recognizing hardware on a new system. I know that's a big, bold statement. But try it. Try installing Ubuntu on a laptop or desktop. Now, laptops, of course, are special beasts with regards to Linux because there are certain hardware that's proprietary. I have a Piccolo N150 laptop that's teeny tiny. It's 8 inches laptop. And when I installed a bunch of different distributions and didn't like how they functioned on such a small interface, so I installed KDE Neon, and it worked really well. But at first, everything worked except one thing, sound. But then I upgraded it and sound worked. Now, KDE Neon is based on Ubuntu. It doesn't have all of the Ubuntu bits and pieces, but it is based on it. And that's the kind of experience I've had. Maybe I've just been really, really lucky, but I believe that my experience is pretty common with Ubuntu. That doesn't mean it's perfect. It is not perfect. I have had instances where Ubuntu couldn't recognize a sound card. But I was able to find out what the chip was, download the driver for it, and bada bing, bada boom, we're good to go. Same thing with printers. Although my brother laser printer that I've been using for a long time, every time I install a new Linux operating system, it recognizes that printer right away. No drivers installed, and it's without doing anything, it's printing. That's Ubuntu. Now, the other thing that happened, which made me want to talk about some of this, was I often get people reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I'm having this problem with Linux. Can you help me?" Now, I can't help everybody because number one, I don't get paid to do that, and number two, I don't always have time. But if I have time on my hands, I will gladly reply and say, "Hey, have you tried this?" Well, I had somebody reach out to me. Now, they were using Zorin OS, but it's based on Ubuntu. And they reached out to me and say, "Hey, I installed Zorin OS on kind of a Franken laptop and it was working great. And then my friend did something and then an update happened. And now all of a sudden everything's too big on the screen." So immediately I thought, well, let's just open up settings and see if you can either fix it with fractional scaling or change the resolution and see if that works. Well, that didn't work for them. Now understand, I'm doing this over email. I'm not logging into their computer. I'm not using any team viewer or anything like that. So this is all just text-based help. I don't have immediate access to it. So a lot of it was guesswork. And because it was via email and, I can only do it at certain, when I have time, it took a while. And I don't know if they've actually resolved the issue because I haven't heard back from them. So I walked them through various and sundry things, and it wasn't a thunderstorm. They weren't having any luck with it. So eventually I said, okay, I thought, okay, I want to talk about how to deal with NVIDIA on Ubuntu here, because it's not always straightforward. But here's the thing. For just casual usage, Ubuntu usually will set up NVIDIA cards pretty well. Now, if you're getting into gaming and video editing, you're going to have to take some time. And what that consists of, generally speaking, is going to the NVIDIA site and download. NVIDIA has one of the best search functionalities of any corporate site I've ever used. And so you go to the search section and you can just type Linux, and then it'll give you drop downs, and you select your card and make other selections, and you click go or download, or you think it's download, and then it'll take you to another page, and then you download the file, but the file is a .run file, so it's not a .deb file. Once it downloads, you will then open up a terminal window. And let's say you've downloaded this file to your downloads directory. So you would then type cd space tilde / D downloads. That'll change into the downloads directory. Now you've got this NVIDIA Linux run file. I don't know the full names of them because they are all different. But first you have to give it yeah, there's some nice thunder going on. First you have it's ambiance. So first you have to give it executable permission. So you type chmod space +x space and then the file name. So let's say it's NVIDIA-Linux blah 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 .run. Now you have executable permissions on that file. So then you type / and then the file name. So you could type Linux and then hit tab and it will auto-complete the file name. Hit enter. It's probably going to ask you for your sudo password. Give it that. And then it's going to install the proper driver. Perfect. Okay. Now, there's one other thing you should do. NVIDIA has a tool. It's the NVIDIA Control Center or something like that. Install that with sudo apt-get space install space NVIDIA-settings. I think that's the name. Run that, and it'll install the control panel. And then you can either search for the control panel in your desktop menu, or you can type NVIDIA-settings in the command, and it'll open up the NVIDIA control panel where you can configure your NVIDIA GPU or graphics card. And there are a lot of things that you can configure in this, but the default settings should be good. Now, you might need to reboot your computer before the driver takes effect. Now, I'm going to warn you about this. The thing about Linux, especially with regards to graphics drivers, is, and this is one of the reasons why I don't tend to monkey with this very much. Typically, when you install it, it will install, I think they're still called the Nouveau open source NVIDIA drivers. And it likes to default to that. And I prefer to use those because it's the default. And Ubuntu knows how to use it. And it's there out of the box. And I'm not going to screw anything up. But if I install the wrong NVIDIA driver, I could screw things up. So that's it. That's the key here. Is when you download that NVIDIA file, you have to make sure you're downloading the file for your graphics card, specific make and model. It'll be NVIDIA, but you've got to make sure you download the right one. If you install the wrong one, you could wind up, your desktop environment may not be able to run. So you'll wind up, hopefully, you'll be able to access the terminal window. You can anyway. You can do that from the, you can go into, I can't even remember what it's called, emergency mode. I haven't used it in so long. But at boot, you can boot into the emergency mode, and you'll get to the command line where you could, if you have to download the right file, you can download it with wget, or you could copy it from one machine to a shared folder on the computer, whatever. So, but suffice it to say, download the right file out of the gate. So it's like that adage, measure twice, cut once. The same thing holds true here. Verify that you know which driver to download and install that one. Now, why would you do this? The main reason why you would do this is you want to game. You want to game on your Linux machine. You might want to use Steam and run Steam games. And the default drivers on Linux will work, but they're not going to work as well. You're not going to be able to get you might not get high enough frame rates, blah, blah, blah. But for casual computing, for social media, shopping, news, banking, things like that, just stick with the open source Nouveau drivers. Just stick with what you get. Ubuntu is really good at it. And yes, you can go into the display settings in system settings, or just settings, and change the resolution and change the fractional scaling and other things, and tweak that desktop the way you want it. And the nice thing about it, when you change the resolution, it's going to show you what it'll look like, and it'll say you want to apply this or revert. So if you switch a resolution that doesn't work for you, just hit revert and it'll go back to what it was. And that's the safe thing about it. And the one thing I've noticed is that not every distribution, even if it's based on Ubuntu, has that. Now, there is an even better way to find the right driver for your machine. And I saved this for last because it's just the easiest thing. If you open up an application called Software and Updates, I think it's what it's called. It'll be in the main menu. Just type updates in the search, in the application overview search, and you'll see Software and Updates. Open that up and go to, I think it's called the Additional Drivers tab. And if Ubuntu discovers that you have a piece of hardware that would benefit from a different driver, it will list it. You can then select it, and Ubuntu will switch to it. And if Ubuntu tells you that this is the best driver, more than likely that's the best driver. So before you go about downloading the NVIDIA file, try that first. And if that doesn't work, then go back to downloading the NVIDIA file and try that. But if it's just going to be for casual computing, don't worry about it. Just use what Ubuntu discovers because it's really, really good at it. Ubuntu is better at hardware discovery than most distributions. And that, my friends, is why I believe that Ubuntu is one of the most popular distributions on the planet. Because I can go, I've got this cool desktop or laptop machine, I want to install Linux distribution. So I grab Fedora and I install Fedora. It's not, doesn't look right, or something's not working. Then I'll install, I don't know, Elementary OS. No, that doesn't work right. Let's try Arch Linux. Nope. Let's go back to Ubuntu. Oh yeah, Ubuntu worked. That's kind of the way it goes. And I'm not saying that that is the way, that's not every story. You may have a desktop that works really well with Zorin OS and no other distribution, or Arch or whatever. But, and it's, for example, I tend to buy System 76 desktops. I have, my last 3 desktops were System 76. There was a Leopard Extreme, and then the first iteration of the Thelio, and then the second iteration of the Thelio. And they ship with Pop! OS, and it works great. And I have tried other distributions on the System 76 machines, and yes, they work, but they're not quite as performant as Pop! OS. So I guess part of the lesson here is to know what your hardware is, know what you're working with. But even so, Ubuntu is probably going to recognize that hardware better than any other distribution. Now, that is my experience. It may not be your experience. So after over 30 years of around 30 years of using Linux, it was 97. So in 2 years it'll be 30. So 28 years. I can do math. Whee! After using Linux for that long, I've had enough experience to say I believe that Ubuntu has the best hardware recognition around. My camera light just went off. Battery died. So it probably looks a little different now. That's what I've got today. So I would highly recommend, if you've not tried it, download Ubuntu for your desktop. Give it a whirl. You've probably heard people say, no, don't try Ubuntu because of Canonical and Snap and blah, blah, blah. Just give it a try. Just give it a try and see how it works for you. I'm pretty confident that you'll have a positive experience with Ubuntu. Anyway, thank you so very much for listening to me for a while here on this Saturday. I apologize, this should have gone up Thursday, but life got in the way. So here you go. Hopefully next week I'll get back on track. We'll see. Thank you so very much, and I hope that you and everyone you know and love have a wonderful, wonderful day.